Imagine this for a second. Overnight, fortune chooses you. Maybe a small investment suddenly explodes beyond logic. A side business you barely took seriously starts printing money. Or an inheritance you never expected quietly lands in your account. At first, it feels like a blessing, almost divine. But is it? Machiavelli once said, "Fortune is a woman. She favors the bold but abandons the unprepared." And that's the part nobody talks about, because sudden wealth doesn't change who you are. It exposes you. It magnifies everything. Your habits, your discipline, your impulses, your blind spots. What you thought was freedom quickly turns into gravity, the kind that pulls people into your orbit. Friends, strangers, opportunists, all hungry for a piece of what you now have. And if you think this situation is rare, it's not. Statistically, some of you watching this will experience it. Lottery wins, crypto surges, startup equity exploding overnight. It happens more often than people admit. But here's the dark truth. Most people who get rich quickly don't stay rich. Study after study shows the same pattern. Lottery winners, instant millionaires, many of them end up bankrupt, divorced, addicted, or completely lost within a few years. They don't just lose money. They lose stability, relationships, peace of mind. Why? Because they confuse wealth with wisdom. They think getting money is the hard part. It's not. Keeping it is. Machiavelli saw this centuries ago when he wrote about rulers who inherited power instead of building it. He who becomes prince through fortune alone, he said, will maintain his power only so long as fortune favors him. The same applies to money. If you haven't built the discipline required to create wealth, you won't have the discipline required to protect it. So before your sudden rise, understand this. Your greatest advantage is silence. The world will push you to show it, to post it, to prove it, to wear your success like a crown. But the moment you broadcast your wealth, you invite attack, because visibility creates vulnerability. The smartest people understand something most never will. Real power is quiet. They practice what I call stealth wealth. These are the individuals who own everything but appear to own nothing. Their lifestyle looks ordinary. Their presence is understated, but behind the scenes, their influence runs deep. History is full of examples. Take Cesare Borgia, one of Machiavelli's most studied figures. He built power through strategy, charm, and calculated force, but even he understood that visibility attracts enemies faster than admiration. Or consider something more modern. Jack Whittaker. He won $315 million in the Powerball lottery. Overnight, he became a symbol of success, generous, loud, visible. He gave money to strangers, supported communities, funded projects, helped friends. For a while, people loved him. But when the attention faded, so did everything else. His personal life collapsed. His relationships fell apart. His family suffered. Addiction and tragedy followed. Years later, he admitted something chilling. He wished he had never won. That statement alone should tell you everything. Because what looks like a blessing can become a curse when you're not prepared to carry it. And that leads to the first rule of sudden wealth. Conceal it. Not out of humility, but out of survival. If fortune hands you gold, act like nothing has changed. Because in a world obsessed with visibility, anonymity is power. You might believe you can manage the attention, control the narrative, filter who gets access. But Machiavelli understood human nature better than most. People are envious. They're curious. They test boundaries. The moment they sense advantage, they start calculating how to access it. And that's where most people fail. They think wealth is about having more. But real wealth is about structure. Which brings us to the second law of sudden fortune. Concealment through structure. You don't just hide wealth. You design it in a way that it can't be easily seen. Machiavelli advised rulers to build fortresses, not just physical ones, but strategic ones. In today's world, your fortress isn't made of stone. It's made of systems, because even if you say nothing, people will notice something has changed. Subtle upgrades, new behaviors, different confidence. People sense shifts. They may not understand it, but they feel it. And when they do, they start watching. That's why silence alone isn't enough. You need structure. The first person you talk to shouldn't be a friend or family member. It should be a professional, an attorney, someone who understands trusts, legal frameworks, tax systems. Because here's the truth. Real wealth is never directly owned. It's controlled, structured, protected behind layers. Machiavelli talked about ruling through intermediaries, letting power flow through systems that conceal its origin. That same principle applies here. You build entities, trusts, holding companies. You separate ownership from identity. On paper, you look ordinary. Behind the scenes, you're protected. This isn't paranoia. This is strategy. Because once wealth is exposed, it becomes a target. But when it's structured correctly, it becomes invisible. And invisible wealth is the hardest to attack. Look at families like the Rothschilds. For generations, they influenced economies, funded governments, shaped history. Yet their public image, quiet, reserved, almost boring. They didn't need to prove anything. Their power spoke for itself. That's the level of thinking you need to adopt, not loud success. Controlled influence. Now, you'll often hear people say, "Don't quit your job if you suddenly get rich." I disagree, but not in the way you think. The goal isn't to stay employed. The goal is to stay engaged. Work, when done correctly, gives you structure, discipline, focus. Machiavelli warned that idleness weakens men. And he was right. Because the real danger of sudden wealth isn't spending, it's stagnation. When you remove struggle overnight, you remove the very thing that kept you sharp. So don't quit work. Quit what drains you. Quit what limits you. But replace it with something meaningful, something that keeps you moving. Because momentum is protection. A man who is building is hard to distract. A man who is idle becomes vulnerable to impulse, to emotion, to poor decisions. Look at the most successful individuals today. They don't stop working. They refine their focus. Jeff Bezos didn't chase 10 different industries. He built Amazon into a fortress. Warren Buffett didn't jump from trend to trend. He mastered investing and stayed consistent for decades. They understood something simple. Focus is power. Consistency is a weapon. And the moment you spread yourself too thin, you weaken your entire position. So if fortune ever finds you, don't celebrate too loudly. Don't reveal too quickly. And don't assume you're ready. Because wealth isn't just an opportunity. It's a test, and most people fail it long before they realize what's happening. Now, once your habits are steady, once your identity isn't being pulled in 100 different directions, it's time to deal with something far less exciting, but far more dangerous. Your financial vulnerabilities. Machiavelli warned rulers about internal threats long before external ones. He believed that problems inside your own walls are always more dangerous than enemies outside them. And in your financial life, debt is exactly that, an internal enemy. It doesn't look threatening at first, especially when money is flowing. A few loans here, some credit cards there. It feels manageable, almost irrelevant. But that's the illusion, because debt doesn't attack all at once. It waits. It compounds. And when it finally moves, it moves faster than you expect. A 20% interest rate doesn't care how rich you feel. It grows silently, feeding on your indifference until it starts eating into your foundation. So, here's the third law of sudden wealth. Eliminate internal threats first. Before you invest, before you expand, before you even think about multiplying your money, clean your base. Pay off high-interest debt immediately. Because removing a 20% liability is the same as earning a guaranteed 20% return. No risk, no volatility, no uncertainty. That's not frugality, that's strategy. Now, not all debt is equal. Low-interest obligations like certain mortgages or structured loans can be used intelligently. If your interest rate is 2-3% and your capital can generate higher returns elsewhere, it may make sense to keep that debt in place. But high-interest debt, that's poison. And Machiavelli would tell you the same thing he told princes. Destroy threats early, or they will destroy you later. Because once debts start growing unchecked, it doesn't just affect your finances. It affects your psychology. It creates pressure, subtle anxiety, a constant background noise that influences every decision you make. Even if you don't consciously feel it, it's there. And the moment you remove it, something shifts. You start thinking differently. You stop acting like someone who owes and start acting like someone who owns. That mental transition is everything. But here's where it gets more complicated. Because even after you've secured your finances, even after you've eliminated internal threats, your biggest challenge hasn't even begun yet. It's not markets, it's not taxes, it's not inflation, it's people. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. Men are more ready to offend one who desires to be loved than one who wishes to be feared. And when you suddenly gain wealth, you don't just attract opportunity. You awaken expectation, especially from the people closest to you, friends, family, relatives. They won't always say it directly, but they'll feel it. They'll start telling themselves stories. You got lucky. You wouldn't be here without me. You can afford to help. And the more accessible you appear, the more those expectations grow. Which leads to the fourth law of sudden wealth. Never turn relationships into transactions. Because the moment money enters personal relationships, everything changes. If you lend money to a friend or family member, you create a hidden contract. If they don't repay you, resentment builds. If they do repay you, they feel controlled. Either way, something breaks and it rarely goes back to what it was. Machiavelli warned rulers never to give what they could not take back without creating hatred. The same principle applies here. Once people see you as a source of money, they stop seeing you as a person. They start testing your limits. Just this once, it's a small amount. I really need this. And here's the trap. If you say no, you become the villain. If you say yes, you become the bank. So, what's the solution? Strategic generosity. If someone you truly care about is in real need, something serious like a medical emergency or a life crisis, then help them. But don't call it a loan. Make it a gift and make it clear it happens once. No cycles, no repetition, no expectation of future support. This does two things. It protects the relationship, and it protects your position because you're giving from strength, not obligation. And strangely enough, this approach often earns more respect than constant giving ever could. Now look at what happens when people ignore this. Athletes, entertainers, individuals who rise quickly from nothing. Many of them lose everything, not because they made bad investments, but because they couldn't say no. They carry entire families, support dozens of people, fund lifestyles that were never meant to be sustained. And when the money runs out, so do those relationships. Mike Tyson is a perfect example. He earned over $300 million during his career, and within years he was bankrupt. Not just because of spending, but because of the endless flow of money outward to people, to expectations, to obligations that never stopped growing. Because once you become the provider, you don't get to stop unless you set boundaries early. This is simply human nature. People remain loyal as long as it benefits them. So your power cannot depend on their approval. It must depend on your control, your boundaries, your discipline. Because preserving wealth sometimes requires you to appear cold, not cruel, not heartless, but controlled. Think of it like this. Be warm from a distance, untouchable up close. Now, once you've handled relationships, another danger appears. And this one is even more seductive. Spending. This is where more fortunes are destroyed than anywhere else. Not in markets, not in business, but in lifestyle. Which brings us to the fifth law of sudden wealth. Never consume the principal, only the yield. The difference between people who stay rich and people who go broke is simple. One group treats money like an asset. The other treats it like fuel. The wealthy understand something fundamental. Your capital is your foundation. It's the engine. It's the thing that generates everything else. And once you start eating into it, you're weakening your entire structure. Think of money like farmland. If you harvest crops, the land continues producing. But if you start burning the soil itself for warmth, eventually there's nothing left to grow. That's exactly what happens when people spend their principal. They feel rich, so they upgrade everything. Houses, cars, lifestyle, social circles. But they're not spending income. They're spending the source of income. And once that source shrinks, everything else collapses with it. There's a real case of a family in California who won a massive lottery. Within months, they upgraded everything. Luxury home, expensive cars, private schools, designer living. 2 years later, they were forced to sell the house at a loss because their wealth wasn't managed. It was consumed. Taxes, maintenance, poor decisions. It all compounded, and eventually it devoured them. So here's the principle you need to understand. You don't live off your money. You live off what your money produces. That's the shift. That's the mindset. And here's a simple way to think about it. Calculate your annual lifestyle cost. Let's say you need $200,000 per year to live comfortably. Multiply that by 25. That gives you $5 million. That's your base, your freedom number. Because if that $5 million generates a modest return, say 6 to 7 funcham annually, you can sustain your lifestyle without touching the core. The income supports you, the capital stays intact, and over time it continues to grow. Even if you're not there yet, start thinking like this. Every financial decision becomes clearer when you ask one question. Does this strengthen my foundation or weaken it? Because every dollar you spend is either building your independence or eroding it. And once you understand this, your entire relationship with money changes. It's no longer about luxury. It's about leverage. It's about control. It's about building something that sustains you quietly, consistently, without needing attention. But even after all this, there's one final step, because protecting wealth is one thing. Growing it intelligently, without chaos, without unnecessary risk, that's a completely different game. And that's where most people again get it wrong. Now that you've learned how to protect your wealth, the real question is this: how do you grow it without losing your peace? Because making money is one skill, keeping it is another, but multiplying it quietly, consistently, without chaos, that's an entirely different level of thinking. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He warned that a ruler should never rely purely on fortune, but on systems, structures that continue working even when luck disappears. Because wealth without a system is just delayed collapse. So here's the final law of sudden fortune. Treat investing like governance. You are no longer just earning money. You are managing a system, a state, and every decision you make from this point forward determines whether that state grows or falls apart. Most people approach investing like gambling, chasing trends, following hype, reacting emotionally. But that's not how the wealthy think. To them, every dollar is a unit of power. Every investment is a strategic move, and every market is a battlefield. If you send your resources blindly into that battlefield, you lose control. But if you organize them, structure them with intention, you build something that survives, something that compounds, something that doesn't depend on luck. This is how the real one funcham operate. They don't just have money. They have systems that produce money. They think in terms of allocation, balance, control. So how do you actually do this? Think of your wealth like an army. Not one single force, but multiple divisions, each with a specific role. Each one designed to perform under different conditions. The first division is your growth engine, broad diversified equity. This is where long-term expansion happens. Index funds, total market exposure. This is the part of your portfolio that rides human progress itself. Innovation, business growth, economic expansion. Over long periods, this space has historically delivered strong returns. It's not flashy, it's not exciting, but it works consistently. This is your army pushing forward, expanding your territory year after year. But a wise ruler doesn't rely only on offense, which brings us to your second division, defense. Bonds, fixed income assets. These don't grow aggressively, but they stabilize when markets panic, when volatility hits, when everything else feels uncertain. This is what holds your system together. Machiavelli would call this balance. The ability to stay aggressive without becoming reckless. Now, beyond paper assets, you need something tangible, something anchored in the real world. That's where the third division comes in. Real estate. For centuries, the most powerful families held land, not just for status, but for stability. Property produces income. It appreciates over time, and it exists outside the fluctuations of purely financial markets. It grounds your wealth. It gives it physical presence. Then comes your fourth division, speculation. This is where most people go wrong. They treat speculation like a primary strategy. But in reality, it should be controlled. Limited assets like Bitcoin, Ethereum, or emerging technologies fall into this category. High potential, high volatility. So you don't bet everything here. You allocate a small portion, 5 to 10 funcham. Enough to benefit if it grows, but not enough to damage you if it collapses. Machiavelli admired boldness, but he despised recklessness. That distinction matters here. Finally, you need reserves, liquidity, cash or near cash instruments. This is your flexibility, your ability to act when opportunities appear or when things go wrong. Because when everyone else is forced to sell, you get to choose. When others panic, you stay calm and often you buy. This is one of the most underrated advantages in wealth. The ability to wait, to move only when the moment is right. Even a modest return on liquid reserves adds stability to your system. Quiet, predictable, reliable. Now, when you combine all of this, growth, defense, real assets, speculation, and liquidity, you create something powerful. A system that generates income from multiple directions. A structure that doesn't depend on a single outcome. Historically, a balanced approach like this could produce steady returns over time. Not extreme, not explosive, but sustainable. And that's the goal. Because the objective isn't excitement, it's endurance. The great banking families understood this. The Medici didn't become powerful by chasing quick wins. They built systems. They diversified across regions, industries, and time. They thought in generations, not years. That's the mindset you need to adopt. Think in decades, because real wealth isn't built in moments. It's built in consistency. Now there's one more piece people often ignore, and it matters more than you think. Enjoyment. Even Machiavelli understood that power without satisfaction leads to emptiness. So yes, set aside a portion of your wealth for yourself. Call it your freedom fund. Money you can use without calculation, without guilt. But here's the key. Spend it on what genuinely matters to you, not what impresses others. Because status-driven spending is a trap. It doesn't satisfy, it escalates. There's always a higher level, a more expensive version, a bigger comparison. And if you get caught in that cycle, no amount of money will feel like enough. But when you spend intentionally on things that align with your values, your experiences, your growth, it strengthens your identity instead of weakening it. That's the difference. Machiavelli believed appearances matter, but only when they serve a purpose, not when they control you. And finally, once your system is stable, once your wealth is secure, growing, and under control, you reach a different level of thinking, legacy. Because at some point, money stops being about survival. It becomes about meaning. What do you build that outlives you? What impact do you leave behind? Where does your capital go when you're no longer here to manage it? The most powerful individuals don't just accumulate wealth. They direct it into ideas, into people, into systems that continue creating value long after they're gone. That's the final evolution. Wealth is philosophy, not noise, not display, but quiet influence. And when you truly understand this, everything changes. You stop chasing money. You start designing systems. You stop reacting to opportunities. You start creating them. You stop thinking short-term. You start thinking in lifetimes. And in the spirit of Machiavelli, it is better to act and adjust than to hesitate and regret. So if fortune ever finds you, don't just accept it. Prepare for it, structure it, protect it, grow it. And most importantly, never let the world see where your true power lies. If this shifted the way you see yourself even a little, then don't stop here, because what you've heard in this video is only the surface. There are deeper layers to psychology, influence, and wealth that simply can't be explored fully in one video. Not because they don't exist, but because most people aren't ready to hear them. That's why most stay average. If you're not one of them, then subscribe. Because every video here is designed to sharpen your mindset, increase your value, and separate you from the crowd. No fluff, no noise, just strategy. Most people will watch this and move on. A few will stay and change. Decide which one you are. If this exploration of Machiavellian wealth has changed the way you view your financial future, please subscribe and like the video. We are uncovering the hidden laws of power that they tried to keep buried. Build your fortress. The next vault of strategy will open soon.